Chris Bowen sold us out in Brazil. I've never seen a government minister so completely betray his country overseas. Our climate change and energy minister has always been a global warming extremist. That's not new. But last Friday, Bowen outdid himself at the big UN climate conference. He signed a deal with other countries telling the world to stop buying Australia's coal, stop buying our gas, stop buying, in fact, two of our three biggest exports, a quarter of everything we sell overseas. They should stop buying Australian exports worth $150 billion a year that we need to help pay for pensions and super, hospitals, schools. He even promised to get rid of the coal and gas generators that supply 2/3 of our electricity. Now, Bowen wouldn't have put it as bluntly and honestly as I have, but that is exactly the effect of the declaration he signed on Friday if the rest of the world took Bowen seriously. What he signed is called the Belém Declaration on the transition away from fossil fuels. And it says, among other things, we reaffirm our shared determination to work collectively towards a just, orderly and equitable transition away from fossil fuels. And goes on to call for fossil fuels to be replaced by renewables. Now, that left the Prime Minister on Saturday at the G20 summit in South Africa trying to distance himself from Bowen's big call.
Are there any plans to taper down Australia's production of fossil fuels?
Our position is our position's the same today as it was yesterday. The cheapest form of new energy is renewables. That needs to be backed up by gas, as firming capacity, by batteries and by hydro.
So Chris Bowen says, get off gas, and the Prime Minister says, we'll stick with gas. So which one is it? But let me tell you how radical Bowen's statement is. I'm sure you remember Tim Flannery, the climate extremist who 18 years ago warned that even the rains that fall will not fill our dams and our river systems. His Climate Council actually calls what Bowen said the strongest language we've seen from the Australian government yet about the need to switch away from fossil fuels. Other climate activists came to the same conclusion, strongest language, they were cheering. And here's another measure of how extreme Bowen's statement was. Now, what he signed was actually just a side deal with some other climate catastrophists, fellow thinkers. When it came to the rest of the world, when it came to the final declaration of the United Nations Climate Conference in Brazil, all those delegates as a whole, there is not a single mention of fossil fuels in the entire document, and certainly no demand that the world give them up. Now, one of the reasons, other delegates there fought for their country's interests in a way that Chris Bowen did not. Bowen was happy to give up Australia's coal and gas exports, but the big oil-producing countries in the Middle East, they said, no, we're not giving up our oil exports. And the BBC reports that negotiators from Arab countries refused to join huddles with those who wanted a pathway away from fossil energy. And a delegate from Saudi Arabia even told them, we make energy policy in our capital, not in yours. Why didn't Chris Bowen say the same? Why didn't he protect Australia's exports, its power system, our standard of living? I mean, even Anthony Albanese's defence today of Chris Bowen, who now, by the way, officially doubles as the United Nations President of Climate Negotiations. Well, Albanese's defence suggests the government's climate policies are now set by other capitals in Pacific countries, which use global warming as an excuse to gilt cash out of us.
The Prime Minister has said the Minister for Energy will have, quote, unprecedented influence in global climate negotiations as the President of COP31 negotiations. Why isn't this part-time Minister, full-time President, using this unprecedented influence to lower energy bills for Australians?
Now, I spoke with Prime Minister Rabuka and Prime Minister Marape and other Pacific leaders last week. They are delighted that Australia and the Pacific will be able to play a role in international climate change engagement.
Oh, Pacific leaders are delighted, PNG, delighted. Look, this global warming cargo cult may be in the interests of the Pacific. It's a cash cow for them. But this government should be governing in the interests of Australians. So why did Chris Bowen say to the climate extremists of the world, destroy us? Now, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to call out the Prime Minister for flogging another global warming scare today when he again defended Chris Bowen, like I said, also now President of the United Nations Climate Negotiations.
This part-time Energy Minister, full-time President, is absent from Parliament today, prioritising global summits ahead of reducing power prices for Australians. Prime Minister, how many days will the part-time minister spend overseas in his new role as full-time president?
There will be a meeting in the Pacific about climate change. Without action on climate change, countries like Kiribati and Tuvalu will disappear. Underwater.
Kiribati and Tuvalu will disappear underwater? How often have I dealt with that one? How can anyone trust a word that Albanese says about global warming? Even the ABC 4 years ago reported research suggesting that low-lying Pacific Atoll nations like Tuvalu and Kiribati are not sinking. Hundreds of islands are instead growing because coral and sand keeps getting washed up by waves onto them. In fact, research from 2018 shows Tuvalu is now nearly 3% bigger than half a century ago. And as for Kiribati, researchers from Auckland University just 4 years ago confirmed earlier research that it was growing too. They studied 71 of its islands and found they'd grown 2.45% since the 1940s. Now, I know that politicians from these islands, they like to say, oh, our islands are drowning, because along comes a dupe like Albanese or Bowen, handing them millions of dollars. But all the science that I've seen in the past 15 years suggests that what Albanese said today is not true. So why does he keep saying it?